Yo, hey guys, Bweeks here, back with another video. Today I'm going to bring you a guide for my current knight build. It's a build that a lot of people have been kind of using, the grappling hook plus whirlwind kind of combo. This is just my take on it and my gearing choices, so in case you haven't seen a guide for this type of build or you're just interested in the knight character, this is currently what's going with my knight character. As you know, I've played this knight character as a mana bender, and it got nerfed, and we played a different version of mana bender, and now I have swapped to the most powerful primordial sword, and it has been doing crazy amounts of damage, as you can see here. Usually my grappling hook kills everything except for elites, and then you use whirlwind. So this build was actually a little more efficient before, when I had less damage, because what would happen is grappling hook wouldn't actually kill everything, and it would bring all the enemies to me, and then when I killed them it would auto loot all the materials instantly. So it was a really good material farmer. It's still a really good build. I've tried to drop a lot of the damage. I could find other places to drop damage, but this is basically my min-max version of the build. Yeah, we can get into it, so I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about gearing, my spec, all of that. So we'll first just knock out like Ancestral Legacy because it's pretty short. We're doing 10% raw damage, 10% damage to elites, mana regen. You don't really need the mana regen because we're using mana leech on gear. We don't really need the raw damage. As I said, we've had enough raw damage. Damage to elites is basically all I'm going for. You could end up picking whatever you wanted here. I just went with this Pain Weaver. You could also go for Burning Shadow if you actually need more damage. Early on I was using Pain Weaver and Burning Shadow, and then I switched to using Air Conditioner because it just reduces the attack speed. So like I'm saying, dropping damage for more defense, so we're using Air Conditioner here. Also, this has a 12.17 second cooldown, and it's up for 12 seconds, and the cooldown doesn't start till the duration is finished. So this is only up 50% of the time. I think it used to work where you could have it up 100% of the time, but since it's not 100% of the time, I would rather something consistent like Pain Weaver, and then I'm just using Air Conditioner. So anyway, as far as my actual skills go, I am using Whirlwind as my main skill. So it's currently level 9, but I have plus 22 from gear. It does 350k to 756k, just as a baseline type of thing. I have increased damage based on my movement speed, so I'm stacking a lot of movement speed on this build just to go faster, because the slower I move between packs, the longer everything's going to take. So it was kind of my limiting factor, so I tried to get as much movement speed as possible. Next, I'm using Whirlwind. Has a 50% melee recast chance, but it can only trigger when you deal a critical strike. I'm stacking critical strikes, so I actually have 100% critical strike chance, so I'm getting 50% free melee recast chance. If you ended up getting enough melee recast chance on gear, let's say with like epic stats, you could switch to this one here and you would have increased block stacks. We do still have a way to get block stacks with the build, so this would just be kind of a, just more for the sake of more. Alright, next we have Irremovable. This is while channeling Whirlwind, you have 40% tenacity. This point doesn't really matter. I mean, it's the only one here that does anything because this one's doing Arcane Beam, which is based off elemental damage. Since we're using the Primordial Sword, we're doing 0 elemental damage. Next, I'm using Whirlwind. Deals 45% increased damage, and while you're using Whirlwind, you have minus 25% Ellie Resist. I'm not really stacking Ellie Resist, so this 25% is not a big deal. You also could use the blades that dance around your character, or you could use Whirlwind. Deals 15% increased damage every second, but we basically kill everything in a second, so instead of having to wait 3 seconds to get equal to this node, we just do the 1 second, but you can kind of jump around with those. And then lastly, I am using the Static Vortex. So this is the one where you can't move where you're using Whirlwind, but we don't need to move if we are pulling everything towards us. So we actually ended up trying this other one as well to see if we can move fast enough, but it's just not faster than a 1 second or less grappling hook, and then 1 second or less killing everything with Whirlwind. So this is kind of where we ended up with. As far as grappling hook goes, it also does a lot of damage. Almost does too much damage for our current build because it just kills stuff before it even pulls the enemies to us, so we don't get those materials. But these are the talents we use. We have the increased range. We have the hook pulls things in a radius, so these two together are really good. I would say you could maybe drop this one for the prison layout if you wanted to get even more block if you're having survivability issues, but I just kind of stick with the range. It also works pretty well in the cemetery, but the prison you can just go so much faster, so using those two. Next, this is to sum it up really shortly. If you grapple hook an enemy that deals melee damage, you get melee resist, or 1% damage reduction to melee attacks, and the same is true for projectile enemies and area damage enemies. So you can get to the point where you've pulled enemies enough to where you have 100% of all of them, but what I've seen is melee enemies are the most common, followed by projectile enemies, and then area is pretty rare, but some of the most deadly. So I actually stack different stats based off of this, since most likely I'm going to find a lot of melee and projectile enemies. So we'll talk about that a little later. Next up we have this hook here. This one just gives you increased max life, and it can be stacked to 10 times, so you get 50% increased max life. You don't have to have this one. I've also tried out the blind. So when you pull things towards you, you know, 50% of them are going to miss, but everything was dying, so I didn't really need that, but that's something you could use. And you also could go with this stun, but it's only a 25% chance. So this is like a 25% chance to take no damage. This is a 50% damage reduction because half of them should miss, and this one is 50% more HP, which have a lot of HP, so I felt like this was just the best for avoiding one-shots. And then lastly we have the head slam. So this is just free damage basically. Not really going to read it, and because the other one is dealing with taking over enemies and doing like a summoner thing, so this is just free damage. Lastly, I am using the Banners of War. This just has a lot of damage in this tree, so that's kind of what I'm doing here. You could drop this for any of the other specializations if you wanted, but this is the one I used when I was gearing up the character, when I had less damage, when I was using a non-primordial weapon, when it was lower level, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the first one is if your cast is fortunate, it applies Skewer. Next, I'm getting increased critical strike damage, so this does require you to have your Mage and Huntress leveled, so you get the 80%. If not, I mean, you could just go with the armor penetration, but enemies don't have a ton of armor currently in the game, so armor pen, you're not going to see huge amounts of damage versus the 80% increased critical strike damage. Next, whenever we deal a critical strike, you gain a block stack, so every grappling hook we use is going to crit. It's going to hit every single enemy. We're going to get a lot of block stacks just from that, because we have 100% crit chance. Last, I don't really ever cast the banner, but if I did, I would, you know, I have a 25% chance of getting the Banner of Sluggishness, and that is going to stun enemies. So it's just like free utility. You could use any of them, but I don't really cast the banner at all. But at one point I was doing grappling hook, drop banner, cast Whirlwind, and if you got this one, it stunned them, so that was cool. And I also tried doing the stun on grappling hook with the stun on the Banner of Sluggishness, and you would get like stuns, you know, every other pack basically, but whatever, that's up to you. Next we have blocking resets the cooldown of all your skills, so this is just kind of useful. There's nothing really else here. We do have Skewer for additional damage, and we have, you know, banners placed in a certain order. But this one felt the best, so it's just if you block some damage, you can either re-put down your banner, or you can grappling hook a second time in a row. Whirlwind doesn't have any cooldown, so it doesn't do anything with that. And then I'm also getting an extra 30% critical strike damage from the next row. I've also tried using this one here, where grappling hook had reduced time. I did use this until I got the epic gloves, so you can still switch between them if you are going fast enough where you're killing everything really quickly. You can go for the reduced cooldown time just so it's never on cooldown. Next, I'm taking whenever an enemy deals melee damage to you. If his life is full, the damage is reduced to 0. This basically never comes into play, but the other options just aren't really that good. We don't really care about Pierce in the build, and whenever you skewer an enemy, the skewer, you skewer as if the damage was dealt as critical strike damage. Not really a big deal, it's just more damage, so I'm going with the defensive option here. And then lastly, non-fortunate, non-perfect knight skills deal 20% increased damage, which is basically just 20% increased damage, because most of the time we're not going to be doing fortunate or perfect skills. Anyway, so that's the skills of the character. We'll quickly talk about the weapon and the gear. So we are using the most powerful primordial sword, which is an Asterisk sword. This one's level 100. You unlock it after killing 42,000 enemies with the regular most powerful sword. Once you get to that point, you will unlock the primordial version and you can start using it. So what the primordial does is it gives you a bunch of just Reaper damage, and then it also has a Reaper damage multiplier, so 310%. So you're getting an insane amount of just extra damage, and its downside is your AoE damage is reduced to 0, which at this point in the game, AoE damage isn't a big deal because we can't really imbue our skills yet, so the downside doesn't really do much to us. I think as the game progresses, this won't be as powerful of a weapon, but it is super powerful right now. And yeah, so all my gear has plus 5 level of Asterisk because that's his Slormancer. I'll also talk about just the gear in general. So you don't need all these legendaries. I played this build with full rares or full epics at one point that didn't really have amazing epic stats. Maybe it had like one that was good for each, but either way, you can play it with a lot less gear. You could definitely just do base stats, magic stats, and rare stats and be completely fine. But I'll talk about all of the decisions. So I'm using Heavens of Steel because it has a 70% max Reaver damage multiplier. I'm just going for armor, attack speed, melee recast chance because we want to get that 100% melee recast chance. So whenever we use Whirlwind and crit, we have a 50% chance to do a melee recast chance. So I'm getting another 50% from gear just to make sure I have enough for it to 100% of the time. We'll quickly talk about stats because that kind of makes sense here. So we have a lot of movement speed. We don't stack attack speed because we don't have cooldown on Whirlwind, and our grappling hook is pretty short cooldown. I'm doing 100% critical strike chance, 448 critical strike damage, 51 astral strike chance, 415 astral strike damage. I have some armor pin, but it's really not a big deal. I have damage to elites, just a decent stat. I'm trying to stack some armor, and I also have all damage reduction, elite damage reduction, melee damage reduction, projectile damage reduction, and area. So I have skewed it basically towards the area damage because it's harder to get stacks with the grappling hook with that. So if we look at it, if it's an elite that does area damage, we have 50, 60, 70, 80, 85% damage reduction there. Melee baseline, you know, we have like, what is that, 60 something? And then projectile, if it's an elite, that's 40, 50, 60, 70, 75%. So it's a lot of damage reduction. And then as we get more stacks from using the grappling hook, it will go up to 100 melee, 100 projectile, and we almost have 100 area damage. So anyway, very tanky build. We also have just a ton of health, 19k baseline, and then we get the extra 50. It goes up to about 25, I think. And then on the third tab, we have, what else have we been stacking? The melee recast chance. Like I said, we want to get this to 50, and then that's really it. So just a quick look at the gear. Armor, attack speed, melee recast chance. Doing life. I basically rolled epic stats for anything useful, so all of these epic stats are just basically the first thing I found that was useful for my character. So critical strike damage, max life, movement speed. This legendary effect is pretty huge as well. You get 70% increased max Reaper damage. So when you actually go and look at your damage, so Reaper damage, the top end is increased by 70% here at this 309 number. You take that off, it goes, you know, a lot lower. So super good shoulders, and as you reinforce them, that number goes higher. Anyway, we'll just kind of rapid fire some of these other ones. So we're doing Ancestral Strike Chance, Critical Strike Chance, Ancestral Strike Chance, Melee Recast Chance, and then we just rolled epic stats until we got some useful ones. So we got Ancestral, Melee Recast, and Movement Speed. Gloves, we're doing the cooldown gloves, which is basically attack speed. So almost all of our attack speed is coming from this, which is only really useful for my grappling hook, but that's what we have. So we have Ancestral Strike damage, Critical Strike chance, projectile damage reduction, and then epic stats. Astral Strike damage, area damage reduction, critical strike chance. So we just, you know, whatever you get. I would take life, I'd take area damage. This has movement speed. Everything that can have movement speed, I basically have movement speed. So I'll just kind of show the items. I don't need to talk about all of them. So again, more movement speed, more damage reduction. You don't even really have to stack that much damage. I'm using these boots to get extra armor multiplier based on my missing life. There really just isn't a lot of good boots. You really don't need these boots at all, but I was trying to pair them with this chest that gives you armor. and it gives you an armor multiplier. So as my life goes down, I get more armor. We're not stacking a ton, so we currently have 3.3k, which is 14% reduction at Wrath 10, but as my life goes lower, then this number would go higher, but it's not that big of a deal. We'll show off the last ring, just more of the same. I'm using the stagger belt, so a lot of the damage is getting reduced that I'm taking, but any damage I do take, 20% of it is going to be spread across 10 seconds, so I can leech through that very easily. And I'm also using the black cape, which gives me another mitigation, where 15% of the damage is dealt to my mana instead of life. So 35% of the damage I take after all of these reductions are sent to either damage over time or my mana, and then I just leech through those with no issues. So anyway, just gonna quickly show off, you do need to get life leech on one piece, and you need to get mana leech on another. I believe I have mana leech on my amulet. Yeah, so I just have it as an epic stat. You can easily get them on gloves and bracers if you needed to. And then I'm also using a max life multiplier helm. So anyway, this is like all the min-maxed stats for my character. I'm also doing +2 Whirlwind on all the pieces of gear, so that's +22 levels on Whirlwind, and then I'm doing +3 Savagery on every piece of gear. I'll quickly show off the attributes. So this just gives me raw damage, critical strike damage. I don't care about the overdrive. Reaper damage multiplier is great. Armor pin is okay. Melee damage reduction is just nice for me. Skills in your secondary slot have a 15% chance to ignore armor, so I actually moved Whirlwind to my secondary slot. Life leech thing doesn't matter. The max mana equal to your missing, or sorry, the max raw damage equal to your missing mana isn't a big deal, but then the last one is a huge deal. You have plus Reaper damage. Reaper damage equal to 10% of the difference between your minimum skill damage and your minimum LE damage. So my LE damage is 0 from the primordial, and then we're just stacking a bunch of damage, so this gives me a bunch of extra free damage. There was a time where it didn't go for these last 10 points that give me the melee damage reduction, because I didn't have enough critical strike chance. So I put those 10 points here and get the 6 crit here and the 4 crit here. So it's an extra 10 if you need it there. There's also some other options you can do, but I eventually could go full savagery, so that's what I ended up doing. Yeah, and that's basically gonna ramp up the character. There's maybe a few other things I could switch out or don't even have to like worry about. I would say none of these legendaries are really required. This is probably the biggest one as far as damage is concerned, and this is the biggest one as far as just clear is concerned, because you don't have to get attack speed on any pieces of gear. But outside of that, the armor, not a big deal. This is just damage reduction, and this is just more effective health. But anyway, that's the build. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you have any comments about the build or any questions. There weren't any good, really, amulets, rings, or bracers quite yet for the build, but I'll keep looking at them just in case they do come out with something at some point. But yeah, this is my current build that I'm using on the night. It seems very effective, and I've been enjoying it a lot. So hope you guys enjoy. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.